Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at some of the updates. There was quite a lot of nerfs that have been going around in patch 9.1. Some of the first bigger updates for this patch with some of the new content and new changes for classes. But a lot of them are going to be nerfs. But also, finally, all this anima that you've been hogging in your bags, maybe even storing in your bank because you just capped on anima and you can't put it anywhere else. In a recent update for WoW, there's actually added a vendor over in Orbos where you can finally spend your anima. So let's take a look at some of the different updates we've gotten in this patch 9.1, some of the confusion that came out of it, and let's take a look at everything new that's happening in the game. First bit, we'll take a look at some of the PvP updates. Certain classes have taken quite a few nerfs, but some of those nerfs are actually kind of celebrated. Starting off with Fire Mages, it looks like with the maintenance, which should be available as of today, Ring of Fire talent will apply its damage over time less frequently for players standing inside of the ring. Apparently when players stood in the ring, they continued getting takes from Ring of Fire, and if they were stunned inside of the ring, they could get and refresh those takes, and basically the damage would just spike out of control. I wonder if mages will start swapping out to other talents, or are they still going to run Ring of Fire, just some of their damage output is going to be a little bit more limited. Then we have the change to Void Volley for Shadow Priest. There's a good chance you've ran into a myriad of priests running Void Volley, where every time they enter Void form, they spit out the Void Volley, all these Void crashes all over the place. Every one of these crashes does significant damage, but also puts the player in a horrified state. This talent is very hard to counter once you get hit by one of these Void Volleys, unless you have a trinket or an immunity. So the damage is getting nerfed by about 15%, which should hopefully make priests a little bit less of a menace out in PvP. Warriors Intervene in PvP is also getting nerfed, where the duration of the Intervene buff is reduced down to 3 seconds instead of the normal 6 seconds in PvE content. It's no surprise that warriors are really good in PvP. The utility they've gotten with this expansion start has been pretty nuts. And even though they've had some of the PvP talents that function with Intervene, like Overwatch, which on Intervene would give your ally that you're intervening to a spell reflect, has been pruned. But I guess that wasn't enough, and Intervene is getting a slight bit of nerfs on top of it. Quite a few players that run into warriors and 2v2s and 3v3s we're actually pretty happy about it. I guess warriors themselves are not going to be happy to see this, although it doesn't completely destroy Intervene's function. Finally, with the Unchained Gladiator Shackles trinket, the malediction effect has been changed. It is now shadow damage as magic damage instead of curse, which gives a lot more play for healers in how to deal with the Shackles malediction trinket. But also, certain classes are seeing a nerf. Mages, as well as shamans and druids, can no longer remove Shackles or malediction trinket by themselves, where prior to that, they had a decurse capability. But for certain healers, it was really tough to deal with because they can't decurse. Paladins, priests, for example, even monks, they just couldn't deal with it at all. So this makes it a little bit easier for healers to judge exactly when to use it, but also when you're playing with certain classes that can easily get rid of the chains malediction, like DPS fighting one another, it's going to be a lot harder to get rid of this trinket. So depending on who you are, this trinket is now easier to deal with or harder. So overall, I think it's a decent change when it comes to the group content for 2v2s and 3v3s. It also looks like there was a bit of confusion earlier in today with the Tuesday reset for NA servers. Everybody woke up and went into Korthia with the new Shards Domination bonus sockets and found that they're actually nerfed, and their power cuts are as high as 50%. It looks like shortly after people made a big stink about it online, Blizzard reversed it. It's weird, but also interesting, as it does seem like potentially in a future build, they're thinking of nerfing these shards, or maybe they decided to go back on it. There were some tweets that talked about potentially this being a reset thing, maybe for the next week that this is planned, some kind of a nerf to some of these shards, but these shards really are strong. In terms of the raid performance and the DPS increases they provide inside of the raid content, they could give you up to 1,000 DPS increase depending on the rank of that bonus. It's actually huge, so we'll see how that will pan out in the future, but potentially there's a plan to nerf some of the shards going forward, and we'll see if they'll actually follow through with it. In another update, Necrotic Wake dungeon has been changed, primarily the weapons scattered all over Necrotic Wake. If you've never done Necrotic Wake before, the dungeon is ran in such a way where are these weapons all over the dungeon. There's Forgotten Forge Hammers, Bloody Javelins, Discharge Anima. All of these abilities are extra items that you can pick up and utilize in order to make the dungeon easier. For Mythic Plus runs, they're basically instrumental in being able to bypass certain trashbacks or even bosses by nuking through them, stunning them, or just doing mad AoE damage while silencing certain casters. They are instrumental in completing the dungeon. Well, as of recently, Blizzard decided to buff the damage output of the Hammer, Javelin, and Discharged Anima, as well as the Anima Exhaust curing ability, but it no longer will scale with player damage modifier effects and can no longer critically strike. Prior to this change, these weapons would work off of players being able to use certain buffs in order to buff themselves in damage, but also certain modifiers like Rogue 100% crit legendary or a Mage in Combustion, which is 100% damage output. When that class or that player threw a Javelin with 100% crit modifier, that Javelin was going to have 100% crit attached to it. And certain classes were able to utilize this in order to get some really cheesy damage, and then it meant for that dungeon you required certain specific classes or specs in order to be able to cheese the weapons. Like for example, recently in the meme build, Elemental Shaman started picking up all these weapons inside of Necrotic Wake because Hammer, Javelin, as well as Discharge Anima, if those abilities crit on an Elemental Shaman, those crits actually do more damage, and Shamans will basically go for a crit heavy build with a very high chance to critical strike the boss. If that Bloody Javelin crit, it did more damage because it came from an Elemental Shaman, basically one-shotting certain mobs and even almost one-shotting certain bosses. But that's not the only interaction between classes, certain Covenant abilities, as well as these weapons. So Blizzard decided to make them more consistent. So the baseline power, and they actually even explained it themselves as well, to make the baseline power of the Hammer, Javelin, and Anima do quite a bit of damage, make it more consistent so they're no longer critical strike, but also make the Anima Exhaust, the curing ability, also more consistent, which are items you want to use in order to make these dungeons easier, but no longer requiring very specific classes to pick up very specific weapons in order to have a very specific cheese out of it. So hopefully this will make the dungeon runs a little bit more consistent, unless you're someone who's trying to really solo the content and just blow past through it. Finally, if you've been hogging all that Anima and you don't really know where else to put it, because ever since Korthia came out, it feels like you're tripping over Anima every step you take, they finally added an Anima Vendor in Oribos. This Anima Vendor is nothing special, and maybe in the future they can add some more items that he can sell, but for now it's just a bunch of trade goods that can either be used for professions in order to craft legendaries on other items, or maybe just professional materials to put up in the auction house to make a quick bank. Or if you are someone who's really just full of Anima, you could spend all that Anima to buy Korthian crystals. These crystals actually go for quite a pretty penny, at least as of making this video, on the auction house. If you make any of those Korthian crystals or find any of them in Korthia, it's definitely a good idea to put them on the auction house because they sell for quite a bit. These crystals are mandatory in order to craft some of the newer legendaries, and all these new legendaries are pretty expensive for a lot of the servers. But with them adding a way for you to buy Korthian crystals, if you end up doing so, that'll most likely bring down the price of Korthian crystals because there'll be more of them. Also, your players taking a little bit of bank on the side in order to buy the consumables for the next raid or the dungeon, but also should hopefully, maybe, potentially, I'm not a marketing guy, but hopefully should bring down the prices of all the other legendaries that are so high up. So we'll see how that pans out in the future, but at least now Anima has something else that you can sink into instead of just all of your different cosmetics, because eventually once you have enough Anima, you're gonna buy all the cosmetics, all the 9.1 stuff, all the suits, the mounts, but after all that's gone, what else is there to spend the Anima into? For example, for my main rogue, majority of my buildings are already upgraded to rank 3. There's nothing else I can really spend them on. And now that Anima actually has some side usage for it, if you've been holding on to Anima tokens, maybe keeping them in your bank, maybe if you like Athaman with literally 300,000 of them, then you might be able to make a pretty penny out of all that Anima. Anyway, thank you guys so much for checking out this video. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. You let me know your thoughts, what you think about the update today. Hope you guys have a good one, and I'll see all of you in the next one.